preparation for Brother Caleb's lesson, I'll be reading the first 6 verses of John chapter 14. Do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If that were not so, I would have told you, because I am going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I am coming again and will take you to myself, so that where I am, there you also will be. And you know the way where I am going? Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How do we know the way? Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
If you haven't already, if you would please open to John chapter 14. We're going to look a little bit this morning at Jesus' discussion with his disciples in the upper room before he heads out to the Mount of Olives and to Gethsemane and ultimately to the cross. And I think a lot of times when I look at this section, I've mainly looked at it as, all right, we want to see the institution of the Lord's Supper. This is happening during the Passover time, so they were already taking a feast where there were different cups drank, but Jesus is going to institute a new monument to himself, to his sacrifice, and how things are going to be different. So they drank these different cups, and so when Jesus is actually partaking of this cup that he talks about is going to be the new covenant in his blood, they've already drank different cups symbolizing different things for the Passover. And this third cup is the cup that represents the significance of redemption. And so it's fitting that when Jesus enacts this new institution of the Lord's Supper, that he's going to use this third cup and how it represents this redemption process that's taking place. And so it's a very important section of events that occur here in the upper room. And so while I'm not going to be talking about the institution of the Lord's Supper so much as what's the other discussions that Jesus has with his disciples in this final few hours that he has with them before he's going to be led off and be crucified? Before I get into that, it's good to see all of you again. I'm excited to be here and to worship with you. It's always a joy, and normally I feel like it's always excessively hot when I come out here. And so when I woke up this morning and it was very gloomy and overcast, but also not scalding hot, I was like, the Lord has blessed me excessively this morning. And so it's a nice cooler day, and we get to stay inside regardless. So I guess it doesn't really matter either way. But it's good to see you all. And so in John chapter 14, Jesus is not necessarily starting his discussion in the upper room. Okay, if you read just the few verses before John chapter 14, we have a very famous interaction between Jesus and Peter. And this is the situation where Jesus has just told Peter, hey, you've got all this fervor and you've got all this energy and all this emotion that you're going to stand up and fight and die and, go all the way for me. And Jesus has just told Peter, you're not going to. All right, these are empty words. You're not going to follow through on this. All right, you're going to profess to lay down your life, but we'll see down the line that he's not going to follow through on that. In fact, he's going to deny Jesus 3 times. And so, picking up then in chapter 14, verse 1, okay, it makes sense, Jesus kind of starting with this phrase, do not let your hearts be troubled. Okay, he's just gotten through a pretty depressing statement, okay? Not just that Peter will be leaving him, but Jesus is going to be betrayed. Bad things are about to happen, okay? And so Jesus is now going to comfort them. And he kind of begins on this long passage over the next 4 chapters, chapter 14, chapter 15, 16, and 17. Now, we're not going to read all of them, but we are going to kind of be jumping around a little bit and just kind of picking out some key messages in there. I know this isn't necessarily the the end-all, be-all message to encompass everything in here, but I thought, looking through this, there's a lot of stuff Jesus hits on. I kind of want to focus on three things. The first thing Jesus really touches on throughout this 4 chapters is how do we get to know God and how do we get to love God? And Jesus as a part of that. But how do we get to know who God is? How do we love this God? Okay, because Jesus uses this phrase multiple times that he first uses in verse 7. All right, so we just had the passage read through the first 6 verses. But picking up right after that, okay, we just had Thomas say, Lord, we don't know the way you are going. What is the way in which you are going? How would we know the way? And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. Then picking up in verse 7, Jesus says, if you had known me, you would have known my Father also. And from now on, you know him and have seen him. So Jesus makes a pretty strong statement. If you think about sitting in a room with your best friends, right? Sitting in a room, think of whoever is that close group of friends that you've had. Could be from childhood, could be now, whatever. Have you ever heard them make that statement? If you actually knew me, you'd know never to serve me Pepsi. I'm a Coke man, right? If you had known me, you'd know I don't like playing, I don't know, whatever. I don't like playing this game. I'm a euchre man. We should play euchre, right? Which is true. Everyone should play euchre. If you don't, that is important. We can talk about that after the lesson, but that is just a common fact. Everybody should play that game. But it's just kind of a backstabbing statement, right? Like, if you actually knew me, you'd clearly know this is the way it should be. And so Jesus is kind of making this underhanded statement, like, if you knew me, then you would already know the way, the truth, the life. But more importantly, here in verse 7, you would know the Father. If you know me, you know my Father also. Now, this is a statement that does not translate to us today, okay? People say that sometimes, like a lot of people tell me that knew my dad or grew up with my dad. They say, you look like your dad, or you act like your dad, or you say, that doesn't mean that if you know Caleb Eldridge, you know Glenn Eldridge, okay? There might be some similarities, okay, some overlaps, but that doesn't mean that we completely translate, all right? So while we might hear that phrase, like if you know me, you pretty much know my dad, or you know my brother, or you know my son, or you know my cousin. We're like totally in tandem. But with God, with Jesus, it's connected. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father also, is what Jesus is saying. All right, by knowing me, you also know the Father. And so Jesus kind of ends with this last passage in verse 7. So from now on, you know him and have seen him. Okay, you have seen the Father. You know the Father. Right after that, okay, after Jesus makes the statement that you feel like is, okay, like you should, if you knew me, you would know the Father. Philip kind of asks the one question you feel like you probably shouldn't say in this moment because Jesus just told you, but Philip says anyway, Lord, show us the Father and it is enough for us. Jesus responds kind of like we thought he would, in the sense of he's just told you you've seen the Father. If you've seen me, if you know me. And then Jesus responds to him in the way we would think. Have I been so long with you, and yet you have not come to know me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own initiative, but the Father abiding in me does his works. Believe me that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. Otherwise, believe because of the works themselves. Okay? So, Jesus is going to keep stressing this idea of if you know me, if you know me, if you know about me, if you have truly understood along the way, you would see the Father. If you see me, you see the Father. This is something that's echoed in chapter 1 of Colossians, in verse 15, when it's describing Jesus. And I think I did a lesson on Colossians here, chapter 1, where it goes through these attributes that Jesus had. The very first one, in verse 15, he is the image of the invisible God. What makes the image the exact image of something except that exact thing? Right? So Jesus is a complete exact image of the invisible God. So if you want to see the image of the invisible God, you look at Jesus. If you want to know the Father, you look at Jesus. If you want to understand the motives of the Father, you look at Jesus. That's why, part of why Jesus came, to reveal this Father, this invisible God of which we have no true way to see in any form or fashion. Jesus gives us an actual visual that we can look upon. Jesus is the exact image of the invisible God. And so he's asking these people that should be the closest to him, have you not understood this whole time? Have I been with you so long and yet you still don't know me? Have you not seen the correlation between me and between my Father and how my Father abides in me? And this is important because when we read throughout this section and when Jesus prays, not only in chapter 17 about his disciples and him abiding in his disciples, and just like Jesus abides in the Father and the Father abides in Jesus, asking for that same relationship is important to understand, because it's all coming back to this verse of, hey, I want them to know me like I know the Father and the Father knows me. That's a closer relationship than we can comprehend. That is closer than you have with your spouse, with your children, with your parents. Okay, that is a deeper relationship. Okay, having that true abiding love that is in one another, like the Father is with the Son and the Son is with the Father. That's what we want, but it's what we don't yet understand. It's what Jesus is helping us to reveal, because he's showing us his relationship with the Father. And so we can understand God by understanding Jesus. Okay, so he keeps using this phrase throughout. If you would have known me, if you knew me, shouldn't you by now have known me, Philip? Okay, all these things are important along the way. Jesus kind of has a key statement, though, in verse 6 that was read for us. I think we've heard it a time or two, probably. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. I think if you look at that statement, okay, when it kind of wraps up, but no one comes to the Father but through me. All right, look at those three attributes: way, truth, life. Okay? All of those things are about getting to the Father. Everything that Jesus talks about is ultimately encompassed in our relationship to the Father. Everything he talks about on this final night with his disciples before the most traumatic events they can imagine are about to unfold, he's talking about relationships to each other, but ultimately all about ending in a greater relationship to the Father. Understanding his relationship to the Father, understanding how they can have that relationship to the Father. So what's the importance of Jesus? What's the importance of Thomas asking that question? And Jesus' great response is, hey, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Okay? The way to what? The truth about what? What is the life? The life is the path to the Father. Life is in the Father. Salvation is in the Father. Jesus is coming on behalf of the Father. All of that stuff is about getting to the Father. This whole grand plan, this whole story that we're reading about, is about the Father's plan to save us. Okay? So we can't read about it enough. We can't have it regurgitated enough back to us. It's all about the Father, our relationship to the Father. And so Jesus, in his final moments with these disciples, is trying to get that into their brains. I am here on the Father's behalf. I speak for the Father. He has given me the words to say. We are in complete unison. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And no one comes to the Father but by me. So if you want to know the Father, and Jesus kind of subtly is saying, believe me, you want to know the Father, you got to go through me. Okay? So Jesus talks about that in verse 6. Key phrase, key important passage. Another way, though, that Jesus kind of outlines and speckles throughout this 4 chapters, talking to his disciples specifically here, he used the term, he's going to bring a helper. Okay? Now, we're not going to get into everything about the Holy Spirit and all that jazz. That's a huge topic. All right? We can do whole class loads on that, right? But when he talks about bringing a helper, okay, he tells his disciples constantly throughout these 4 chapters, guys, I'm about to leave you, okay? I'm going to leave you. I'll come back for a little bit, but then I'm going to leave you, all right? And when I leave you, I'm going to bring a helper. Why do you need the helper? Why is that important? Well, look down in verse 16. That's the first time Jesus alludes to the helper. Or I shouldn't even say alludes to it. He just directly says it. He says, I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper, that he may be with you forever. That is the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive because it does not see him or know him. But you know him because he abides with you and will be in you. Okay, so this is his first time talking about the helper who's going to come, who's going to abide in these disciples, who's going to be with them, all right? And using this term abiding in them is important because we normally hear the term abiding when we talk about the Father abides with the Son and the Son with the Father, right? So still that same terminology, all right? Jumping down to verse 26 of 14. But the helper, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach you all things, and he will bring to your remembrance all that I have said to you. Peace I leave with you. My peace I do not give to you, not as the world. My peace I give to you, not as the world gives, do I give to you. Do not let your heart be troubled, nor let it be fearful. So the key thing Jesus says here about the helper, this is the first time he uses this description. He will teach you all things and bring to your remembrance all that I said to you. Why is that important? Back to what we read in verse 6, right? Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. The things that Jesus has been saying are the pathway to the Father, are the pathway to life itself. And so, if Jesus leaves, we're going to see very quickly that the disciples have a very short memory, all right? Because everything he's saying, you're going to think, did they hear this when we get to a chapter after they're in the upper room? All right, you're going to wonder, did they actually hear any of this message? So, you can understand why it would be important for Jesus to leave a helper, someone to help them remember, to give them a complete remembrance of the things that Jesus has said. Okay, so this helper is going to help them maintain this understanding. He mentions like, hey, I'm not going to abandon you. I'm not going to leave you as orphans in verse 18. All right, I'm going to leave someone with you. That someone is sent from the Father. That someone is sent on my behalf. He will speak my words to you. Okay, so we will abide with you still. And because of that, verse 27, don't be troubled. Don't be fearful. All right? But verse 28, Jesus picks up a similar statement to the if you had known me. Okay, if you had known me. He basically says, if you had known me, in verse 28, instead of saying if you had known, if you loved me, you would have rejoiced because I go to the Father, for the Father is greater than I. And another phrase that we're going to talk about, because we want to know not only how do we know God, but how do we love God? Okay, how do we know God and love God? Well, Jesus talked about we know him because of Jesus. Well, if you had loved me, if you had understood me, if you had understood the process of what's going on and me going to the Father and how great it is, you would be rejoicing. Then he jumps into, all right, talking about this relationship. How do we love this God? How do we love this Father? How do we love his Son? Okay, because this is also something that pops up. And it's something we need to know, all right? Because any relationship, we want to show people we love them, right? We don't want it to just be in word, but in deed, right? We want that to be the case. Any relationship we have, that the person that we love, I want to show them that I love them, okay? Well, how do we do that? Verse 15, Jesus says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Oh dear, right? We have to do stuff, guys. And ladies, sorry, just figures. All right, we have to do stuff. Despite being in a world where you don't have to do anything to pretty much get stuff, all right? Jesus is telling us, if you love me, you're going to keep my commandments. Okay, well, there's a lot of commandments, Caleb. What are we talking about here? All right, obviously there's a lot, and I'm not going through a huge list. But I think it ties in pretty clearly with one commandment when you jump to chapter 15. Jump to chapter 15 real quick. If Jesus is going to say in verse 15, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. And then in chapter 15, verse 12, when he says the phrase, "This is my commandment," I think our ears should perk up. Okay? This is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. Okay? So if we are sitting around looking for a question of what is the commandment, what do I have to do? All right? Because I know there are some people who it's like, you get an assignment, you get a job, you get a task, tell me what I got to do, how do I get to the end, how do I get a satisfactory grade, right? There are some of us that, like, that's what I want the list of things. I don't like the whole, hey, be creative, do this, it'll be fun, like, just make it your own thing. Hate that. Those are the worst teachers to me, all right? You do A, B, and C, you're going to like your grade, okay? That's the kind of teacher I am if you were questioning it, all right? You don't have to sit in my class now. That's how I am. This is what I need. How do I get there? Okay? Jesus kind of does that, but kind of doesn't. All right? Verse 12. This is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. Okay? And goes on to talk about, hey, greater love has no one than this, than to lay down his life for his friends. Talks about how these disciples, you are my friends. Right? Talks about this relationship. How, hey, you didn't choose me. I chose you. Okay? It wasn't that you guys just came out and sought me. I found you and I picked you, and now you're with me. And now you're on this journey with me. All right? I appointed you. Now you can go out and bear fruit. Okay? But this grand commandment, we got to love one another. Okay? How do we keep God's commandments? How do we keep Jesus' commandments? We show love. All right? This kind of leads into the second point, though. All right? If we're following after Christ, if we're following after God, one key message that Jesus says in here that I think stands out, that is kind of depressing, but it's the truth. Starting in verse 18. If you follow after Christ, if you love Christ, if you keep his commandments, therefore showing that you love him, all right, if you're following after him, you're going to be hated. Okay? You're going to be hated. All right, and why does Jesus say that? In verse 18, if the world hates you, you know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, because of this the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you. A slave is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will keep yours also. All right, so a little positive statement there at the end. Hey, it works both ways. All right. If they kept my word, when they hear my words coming from you, they're going to keep that also. But you have to understand, all right, if we love Christ, if we follow after Christ, people will hate us. All right, if you're truly enacting this love, this service, this message, people are going to hate it. Why? It has nothing to do with you, is what Jesus is basically saying here, right? Like, it doesn't actually have to do with, like, how you delivered it all the time. But if the master, if the leader, if the driving force, if they hated that person, and you're following after them, they're probably going to hate you too. If you follow after the master, and the master was also hated, it makes sense that you're also going to be hated. So Jesus is just giving us the layout. Hey, they hated me first. All right, like a lot of things, Jesus was the first, right? And so he's just telling them, hey, when you're on this journey, this pathway, this commandment that you're following, this commandment to love, and all the others of service and sacrifice that you're going to have to commit, all right? They hated me first, doing all these things. And Jesus doesn't really have to say it, but when we talk about Jesus being perfect and being the best at everything, if they hated him and we're going to do a less perfect version, just imagine how much they're going to hate us, right? Like, it's just going to fit. If you hate the best painter in the world, oh man, I don't want to paint your house, right? Like, that's just kind of the truth of it. So Jesus kind of gives us a detail of, hey, they hated me first, and because you're following after me, or if you follow after me, they're going to hate you as well. And so that's just kind of a preparation that Jesus gives to us. And so while this is kind of a shorter point from the first one, I just thought it's important to stress on Jesus kind of going through this journey of, how do you know me? How do you love me? All right. If you love me, this is what's going to happen. And then ultimately, Jesus kind of wraps up with the ultimate uplifting statement, right? Because chapter 14, I don't even want to say wraps up, but he wraps up my lesson, okay? I know it's kind of jumping around. All right, he wraps up my lesson in chapter 14, starting with that first passage we just read. All right, do not let your hearts be troubled. Why, Jesus? Why should we not let our hearts be troubled? All right, you just told us we're basically going to let you die, all right, which they weren't truly understanding that, but you're going to be betrayed. Peter's not even going to be able to stand up and support you, all right? But Jesus says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you, for I go to prepare a place for you. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. And you know the way where I am going. Okay, so the uplifting statement, all right, is despite all the difficulties, right, that I'm going to be betrayed, I'm going to be handed over, all right, my time with you is short, as he mentions multiple times. Despite the fact of there being a helper that's coming, Jesus explicitly states it that while the helper is going to have all his words, is going to speak on behalf of Jesus, is going to feed them the knowledge that they need, he does make it clear he will not be with them in the same way. All right? If he was going to be with them in the same way, he wouldn't use the language constantly throughout these 4 chapters. All right? But he wasn't going to be with them as he is now. But before he even got into all that, he told them, I don't leave you just to leave you. I don't go just to prepare a place just so you can know that there's a place prepared, but leave you out there and never come get you. You can know that if I go and prepare that place, I'm coming to get you again. All right? If I go and prepare that place, you can know I don't leave just to let you know that, hey, there's a nice mansion out there somewhere, or there's a nice place out there somewhere that's prepared. He's coming back for you. He's coming back for each and every one of us. Okay? He's coming back to bring us home. All right, so all this journey of the difficulties of the world's going to hate you because they hated me first, and I'm no longer going to be with you. I'll be here for a little while, and then I will leave again. All right, all this stuff that the disciples are calculating all this stuff a million miles a minute. All right, not truly grasping everything. But he started out with the most important thing. When I go, to where I go, and the reason I am going is to prepare a place not to just be there, but to bring you there with me also. Okay, and that's our ultimate comfort, is we believe in a God who has not just left us here to rot and to die and to live an ordinary life of no significance, but to believe that what we are doing has a purpose and a significance, and to believe that he didn't leave us here just to leave us here, but he left us to go and prep and to prepare a way for us, and that where he is, we may be also. Where he is, we may be also. All right, that to me is about the most comforting thing. I don't care about what the mansion looks like. I don't care about the streets of gold, all right? Because eventually, we've gotten tired of everything, right? Physical. You drive by the fancy house enough times, it's just that fancy house, okay? You drive by, a monument of gold, eventually it's just, why doesn't it do something different today? Why doesn't it stand on one leg? All right, we want things to change. We want them to be better, all right? It's the people, it's the relationships we share that make the time and the places we go special. All right, I was talking to Gene, and apparently they went down to Florida and had fun on the beach. I don't know if you've ever gone and just sat on the beach for a whole week by yourself, but I imagine it's pretty lame after a few hours, all right? Usually when you see people go to the beach, kids are there, spouses, parents, everyone's there, they're having fun, they're relaxing, but they're together, right? I've never seen a lot of people post a lot of pictures of day 12 consecutively on the beach, no one's here, but I'm loving it, right? Like that just doesn't happen, all right? And so when you have these people, when we live in a world where they think it's the stuff, right? It's the things that are going to make it totally revolutionary, totally special. All right? I think I already mentioned this, but there's a show about the afterlife. It's called The Good Place. And just spoiler alert, because it's a terrible ending and one of the worst things I've ever seen. But they eventually get to the good place, right? And talking about, how do you get to the good place? What philosophers should we have listened to? They never talk about Jesus. They never talk about that mess. But eventually you get to the end and they're finally there. And you know what? After so much time, they just get tired of living and existing. And the only thing really to do is, let's just cease to exist, because eventually the good place is no longer good. That's the ultimate purpose of life and existence, is just to cease to exist at one point, when you totally get worn out of everything. Isn't that just the worst thing you've ever heard in your life? But the truth is, if we just went to a mansion or a street of gold, if you were there forever, we would eventually hate it, right? It would no longer be good enough. We love Jesus, right? That's why we're here. We want to be closer to Jesus. That relationship, when we are truly reunited, when we have that full circle moment where we come back and that redemption is totally complete, all right, and we're in the presence of the Father, and we're singing, and we're rejoicing forever and ever, that doesn't get tiresome, all right? The people we're with, it doesn't get tiresome. The God we're worshiping, it doesn't get tiresome. That's the only thing that doesn't wear out. So why would Jesus keep talking about this relationship and praying for us to have the same relationship with the Father as Jesus has with the Father, and praying for the same relationship with Jesus that Jesus has with the Father? Because that's what endures, right? That's what lasts, okay? When you look at your span of life, however long it's been or however much longer it is, usually the things that last, you think, I eventually hated that chair. I eventually hated that movie. I eventually hated that couch. I eventually hated that dining room table. I hated that house. We had to move, right? But the relationships, those are meant to endure. Those truly founded with the spiritual connection that we have with Christ. When you have a relationship built on those good Christian principles, those endure. Obviously, I couldn't say every relationship endures, because most aren't built on that relationship, like Christ's love and service and sacrifice. And so those relationships don't even endure. But to make my last statement here, I promise, even though I feel like I've lost my mind a little bit. But despite all of that, right? All of this we believe, right? We believe that's what's coming. That's what we're pursuing, right? Is that relationship with Christ forever in this grand place with all those who have gone before us, those that we have lost, those that we have read about, those that we have previously lived with, and now they're gone, and they've led the way for us in our own lives, right? Those people that we have loved that have taught us these things, okay? And I've thought a lot about this, because I've lost two very close people in my life that have shaped who I am tremendously, okay? People that have taught me why I want to go to heaven, why I need to go there, who I need to see again, and more importantly, who I haven't truly seen, but I am ready to see, okay? I've seen all those things, and we know that's the end path. But before we get there, right, before we could get to that point, right, before Jesus could return for a little while and then leave yet again, he had to endure the cross, right? He had to endure the punishment. And the sad thing is that we read this whole chapter and Jesus is telling us all these great things, and he finishes it up with this beautiful prayer in chapter 17, where all he wants is for us to have the same relationship with him and the Father as Jesus and the Father both have. The closest relationship. And literally, the very exact night, all the people he told that message to run from him. If you read in Mark chapter 14, all right, if you read in Mark chapter 14, starting in verse 32, and Jesus goes to the garden, all right, and he's saying all these prayers, praying on behalf of his disciples, by the way, all right? Not just does he pray that the cup would pass from him, but he also prays for his disciples, for those that he's leaving behind. That very same night, after Jesus is betrayed, all right, 50 and 51 of Mark 14, those two statements. The first one is, and they all left him and fled. The next one talks about this strange passage that many of you maybe have already read, and is one of the strangest in the Bible, where it talks about a random man with one sheet on that has the sheet ripped from his body, and now he's totally naked in this scene in the garden. And you're just like, why would they mention that? Because that man, whoever it may be, and some people think, oh, maybe that was Mark or whoever, doesn't matter. That man, whoever it may be, thought, you know what's worse? You know what's more shameful than me being seen completely nude here amongst all this mob of people? And the only thing worse than that would actually being right next to Jesus, having to stand there with him. That's the only thing more shameful. That's what's about to happen to Jesus. That's what Jesus knows is about to happen. And yet he's still praying and begging of these people, hey, get to know me. If you know me, you know the Father. Follow my commandments. And the commandment he explicitly lists in that passage in chapter 15 is to love one another. All right? To love one another. A sacrificial love that we have with each other and with those that are around us. And Jesus even prays that not on behalf of those that were with him, the disciples, but for all those who believe. He was praying for us. And so we want to serve a God like that. We want to be with a God like that. At least I do. I think you guys do too. I don't need to see a show of hands, but I want to be with that God. I think that's a good way to spend my eternity. And we're actually going to talk a little bit with the rich man and Lazarus this evening about what is the afterlife at its core. What is it truly? Okay, we're going to look at that this evening, so I pray you can come back for that. But whatever your situation is this morning, whatever things you may need, whatever prayers you need to have offered, whatever the situation may be, we pray that you come forward now as we stand and sing this song.